It was always before we started recording, just about to turn over, and he knew the audience were watching all the monitors, and he'd pop up the butt, he'd pop out there and went, who threw that? And I still laugh.
He's got it. He's got it on here, look.
Yeah.
Who threw that?
Who threw that?
It wasn't Del Boy falling through a bar, Rodney's long-suffering sighs, or another doomed get-rich-quick plan that nearly stopped Only Fools and Horses in its tracks. It was a single scene, quiet, uncomfortable, and so out of place that it sent a chill through a show built entirely on warmth and laughter. For a brief, uneasy moment, Britain's most loved sitcom stopped feeling safe. This is the story of the scene that crossed a line, unsettled the BBC, divided fans, and came closer than anyone expected to, pulling Only Fools and Horses off the air forever. Inside the BBC, when a national treasure was put at risk. There was a time when Only Fools and Horses wasn't just something you watched. It was something you planned around. Thursday nights across Britain meant one thing. The trotters were on. Pubs closed early, kettles boiled, sofas filled, and for 30 minutes the country laughed together. Del Boy, Rodney, and their battered yellow van weren't just characters. They were family. The show arrived during a Britain that desperately needed it. The early 1980s were harsh. Unemployment was climbing, opportunity felt distant, and optimism was wearing thin. But instead of lecturing or wallowing, the series did something extraordinary. It turned hardship into humor, struggle into charm, failure into hope. Del Boy wasn't just a wheeler dealer with a suitcase of dodgy goods. He was the dreamer Britain recognized in itself. Loud, stubbornly hopeful, and refusing to accept defeat. His promise that next year we'll be millionaires wasn't just a joke. It was a belief. And somehow, the nation wanted to believe with him. At the center of it all was creator John Sullivan, writing not from theory, but from memory. He pulled characters from real streets, real conversations, and real frustrations. He understood that the funniest stories often come from pain, dressed up just enough to make them bearable. The chemistry between David Jason and Nicholas Lyndhurst was lightning in a bottle. Del's relentless confidence crashing into Rodney's cautious logic created comedy that felt alive. Add Uncle Albert's wartime ramblings, and you had a dysfunctional family audiences instantly trusted. By the mid-1990s, the show wasn't just successful, it was sacred. The 1996 Christmas special time on our hands pulled in over 24 million viewers, nearly half the UK population at the time. People laughed together, cried together, and watched the Trotters finally win. But what made the series untouchable wasn't just the jokes or catchphrases. It was balance. The show could make you howl with laughter 1 minute and quietly break your heart the next. Grandad's death, Rodney's disappointments, Del's loneliness behind the bravado. It walked a tightrope between comedy and truth, and somehow never fell. Until the tone began to shift. As the years rolled on, the world outside changed. Television changed. Expectations changed. Inside BBC offices, whispers began to circulate. Could the show remain timeless if the times themselves no longer were? No one knew it yet. But behind the laughter, something was forming. A creative decision that would test the limits of comedy and silence the audience in a way Only Fools and Horses never had before. When success became a liability. Success can be a strange burden. By the early 1990s, Only Fools and Horses had stopped being just a hit sitcom and had become something far more fragile. A national institution. Every episode was treated like an event. Every line was scrutinized. Every joke carried weight. Inside the BBC, the pressure was enormous. Executives knew they were sitting on one of the most valuable properties British television had ever produced. But with that came a quiet fear. What if something went wrong? The show had always thrived on instinct. John Sullivan wrote from the gut, not from focus groups or formula. He believed comedy needed honesty, and that honesty sometimes meant discomfort. But television was changing. New conversations about taste, sensitivity, and responsibility were starting to creep into creative meetings. Jokes that once passed with a wink were now debated line by line. Scenes were flagged. Dialogue softened. Emotional moments questioned. It wasn't censorship in the traditional sense. It was something subtler. A growing anxiety that the show could offend simply by being itself. Sullivan felt it immediately. He wanted the Trotters to age as real people do. Dreams get heavier. Hope becomes more fragile. Confidence cracks. Del Boy couldn't stay 25 forever, and pretending otherwise felt dishonest. But the BBC wanted comfort. They wanted familiarity. They wanted the chandelier, not the shadows. Writers' meetings became more tense. The tone of the scripts shifted. Episodes leaned darker, slower, more reflective. Not because the humor was gone, but because the pain beneath it was closer to the surface. And then came the episode. On paper, it looked harmless. A character-driven story. Emotional beats. Nothing outrageous. But during filming, something felt wrong. Crew members noticed it first. The jokes didn't breathe the same way. Pauses felt heavier. The laughter, when it came, felt uncertain. One particular scene stood out. It touched on something raw, something uncomfortably real. The kind of truth comedy rarely dares to confront. Sullivan believed it mattered. The BBC wasn't so sure. Meetings were called. Notes were passed. Alternate versions discussed. Executives worried about audience reaction, about headlines, about complaints. According to production stories shared years later, Sullivan refused to flinch. "If we're telling the truth," he reportedly said, "we can't look away when it hurts." That was exactly the problem. By the time the final cut was ready, the network faced a decision: air the episode as it was, or quietly delay it. For the first time in its history, Only Fools and Horses felt vulnerable. What happened next wouldn't just divide fans. It would rewrite how the BBC handled one of its most beloved creations. The Christmas special that shattered the illusion. The breaking point arrived quietly, disguised as celebration. A Christmas special. A longer runtime. A chance to do something bigger. In 1986, A Royal Flush was scheduled as a feature-length festive episode, a prestige slot reserved only for shows the BBC truly believed in. It was meant to be classic Only Fools and Horses. Del Boy chasing status, Rodney stuck in the middle, and social ambition colliding with reality. On the page, it worked. Del Boy tries to climb above his station, determined to impress the upper class and prove he belongs somewhere he clearly doesn't. It was a familiar theme: class insecurity, pride, and misplaced confidence. All territory the show had explored brilliantly before. But this time, something went wrong. One small decision changed everything. Unlike almost every other episode, A Royal Flush was filmed without a live studio audience. Scheduling issues made it unavoidable, but the consequences were huge. Comedy timing is music. Laughter is the rhythm section. Without it, jokes hang in the air too long. Pauses stretch. Moments feel awkward instead of playful. Actors perform differently without immediate reaction. Lines are delivered more slowly. Expressions linger. Silences feel heavier. Then came the edit. To fit the Christmas broadcast slot, key scenes were trimmed. And those cuts mattered. Moments that softened Del Boy, moments that showed insecurity beneath the bravado, were removed. What remained was a version of Del audiences had never seen before. Pushy, tone-deaf, uncomfortably cruel. Instead of misguided charm, viewers saw arrogance. Instead of vulnerability, entitlement. When the episode aired, living rooms across Britain went quiet. People didn't laugh the way they expected to. Some didn't laugh at all. Letters flooded into the BBC within days. Viewers described the episode as nasty, mean-spirited, and wrong for Christmas Day. One complaint summed it up perfectly. Del Boy doesn't feel like Del Boy anymore. Even the cast felt it. David Jason later admitted he was unhappy with how the character came across. The balance had tipped. And once that balance was gone, the magic disappeared with it. There was no public scandal, no official ban, no dramatic announcement. But behind the scenes, a quiet realization set in. Only Fools and Horses wasn't indestructible. Its strength had always come from warmth, from empathy, from allowing its characters to fail without ever becoming cruel. A royal flush crossed that invisible line, and once crossed, it couldn't be ignored. The fallout. When fans turned uneasy and myths took hold. The reaction was immediate and unsettling. For a show that had spent years making Britain feel warm, a royal flush left viewers cold. Within days of its broadcast, letters poured into the BBC. Not angry, not furious, just disappointed. That was worse. Fans didn't complain because the episode was bad television. They complained because it felt wrong. Christmas Day was sacred ground. Families gathered expecting comfort, familiarity, and laughter they could trust. Instead, they watched Del Boy behave in ways that felt uncomfortable, even embarrassing. The laughs were thinner. The joy felt strained. Some viewers said the show had lost its heart. Others called it too harsh for a family audience. A few went further, suggesting the series had finally run out of road. Behind closed doors, BBC executives took notice. There was no emergency meeting, no cancellation order, but something had shifted. For the first time, Only Fools and Horses wasn't being talked about with universal affection. It was being questioned. The episode was quietly set aside. It wasn't immediately repeated. And as months passed without new episodes, rumors began to grow. Had the show been pulled? Had the BBC intervened? Had there been a scene so controversial it was never meant to be seen again? These whispers slowly evolved into legend. Online forums, pub conversations, and fan circles began trading stories of a lost episode, a version that aired once and vanished forever. In reality, most of those memories traced back to a royal flush, or to later re-edits that softened its harshest edges. But myths grow best in silence, and the silence was real. In 1987, no new episodes aired at all. To the public, it felt like uncertainty. To the production team, it was deliberate. John Sullivan stepped back, not out of defeat, but reflection. He knew the show needed recalibration. The warmth had to come first again. The humor had to feel safe. Not lazy, not cruel, but human. That pause, uncomfortable as it was, may have saved the series. Because when Only Fools and Horses finally returned, it came back knowing exactly what it was, and what it could never afford to lose again. The comeback that put the laughter back. When Only Fools and Horses returned in 1988, it did so with something to prove. The silence after a royal flush had been louder than any laugh track. Fans were nervous. Could the show still be trusted to feel like home? The answer arrived in a single episode, Yuppie Love. From the opening moments, the tone felt familiar again. Rodney, forever unsure of his place, tries to fit into a changing Britain of wine bars, designer suits, and upward mobility. Del Boy, never one to miss a trend, reinvents himself as a modern businessman, champagne confidence masking the same old insecurity. It was classic Only Fools, observant, kind, self-aware. And then came the moment. Del Boy leans casually against a bar, mid-boast, mid-flow, and vanishes. The counter flips open, and he disappears straight through it. The timing was perfect. The shock was instant. The laughter was explosive. That fall became one of the most famous gags in British television history, replayed endlessly, quoted lovingly, and remembered with pure affection. But its power went beyond slapstick. Symbolically, it mattered. After stumbling creatively, the show had fallen and stood back up again, with humility, with warmth, with confidence restored. David Jason later revealed the gag was inspired by a real pub incident he'd witnessed years earlier. He and Nicholas Lyndhurst rehearsed it repeatedly to get the rhythm right. The result was effortless magic. Critics noticed the shift immediately. The Radio Times called it a return to form. Audiences agreed. Del Boy was no longer uncomfortable to watch. He was vulnerable again, lovable again, human again. But the revival didn't stop at laughs. The late 1980s episodes carried deeper emotional weight. The humor matured. The writing reflected a Britain in transition, from Thatcher-era hardness toward something more self-aware, more ironic. Episodes like The Jolly Boys' outing, Stage Fright, and The Chance of a Lunchtime weren't just funny. They were layered. Del's bravado began to crack. Rodney grew into a moral center rather than a punchline. Even side characters gained depth, history, and quiet dignity. By the early 1990s, the show had entered its golden period. It wasn't chasing laughs anymore. It was earning them. And in doing so, Only Fools and Horses transformed from a sitcom into something rarer, a shared national memory. The final act, when the dream finally paid off. By the mid-1990s, the story of Del and Rodney Trotter felt complete, even if no one wanted to admit it. They had hustled, failed, argued, reconciled, and dreamed for more than a decade. The audience had grown older with them. So had the characters. John Sullivan knew it was time. Not because the show was failing. Quite the opposite. It was stronger than ever. And that was exactly why the ending had to be right. The farewell came as a trilogy of Christmas specials in 1996. Heroes and Villains, Modern Men, and finally, Time on Our Hands. Together, they formed something rare in television. A planned, emotional goodbye that respected both the characters and the audience. It began, fittingly, with chaos. Del and Rodney, dressed as Batman and Robin, stumble through the foggy streets of Peckham and accidentally foil a mugging. It was absurd. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. But beneath the laughter, there was something new, a sense of finality. The episodes quietly explored aging, disappointment, and the strange fear of what happens if the dream actually comes true. For years, Del had survived on hope. What would be left if hope was no longer necessary? Then, in Time on Our Hands, the impossible happened. A forgotten pocket watch, an auction, a hammer falling at £6.2 million. After a lifetime of schemes, excuses, and setbacks, the Trotters became millionaires. When Del quietly told Rodney, "We're millionaires," it wasn't just a punchline, it was release. On December 29, 1996, over 24 million people tuned in to watch it happen, the largest audience for a scripted comedy in British television history. Families cried, people cheered, and a nation said goodbye. The final image was simple: Del and Rodney driving off in their battered yellow van, rich at last, but unchanged at heart. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, it was earned. Life after Peckham, where the Trotters went next. When the credits rolled, it felt like losing a family member. For 15 years, these characters had lived in British homes. Letting them go wasn't easy. David Jason moved seamlessly into dramatic roles, proving that Del Boy's charm was only one part of his talent. His work as Detective Inspector Jack Frost became another long-running success, earning awards and respect in equal measure. Off-screen, he remained famously private, a man content to let the work speak for itself. Nicholas Lyndhurst chose a quieter path. He continued acting but avoided the spotlight, preferring thoughtful roles over fame. The loss of his son years later deepened that withdrawal, and the public largely respected his privacy. To many fans, he would always be Rodney, the heart of the show. The legacy of Uncle Albert lived on as well. Buster Merryfield's late-in-life acting career became a reminder that it's never too late to matter. His stories of the war remain some of the most quoted lines in sitcom history. And then there was John Sullivan. When he passed away in 2011, tributes poured in from across Britain. Writers, actors, and viewers all said the same thing. He didn't just make people laugh, he made them feel understood. Why that scene still matters. So did one uncomfortable episode nearly take Only Fools and Horses off the air? Not officially, but creatively, it came closer than most people realize. A royal flush exposed something fragile beneath the laughter: the importance of empathy. It showed that comedy, when stripped of kindness, can quickly become something else entirely. That misstep didn't end the show. It saved it. Because it forced everyone involved to remember what mattered most. Not the jokes, not the catchphrases, not the ratings, but the humanity. Only Fools and Horses endures because it respected its characters, even when they failed, even when they stumbled, even when the laughter briefly stopped. And that's why, decades later, Britain still laughs, still cries, and still believes, just a little, that next year might finally be the one.